Okay, hello. You are about to watch our Cavalcade Best Picture Rewind episode, but I wanted to check in because initially this was going to be our Patreon bonus episode for February. If you are not aware, every single month we do an entire bonus episode. Sometimes it's older reviews, sometimes it's new releases, sometimes it's episodes in series like this Best Picture Rewind. But so many people enjoyed our Wings episode that I didn't necessarily love the idea of putting this behind a paywall, and I was looking at the calendar and it kind of dawned on me that we are just about at our 6-year anniversary of ClapperCast. 6 years ago, just as we were going into the pandemic, we started ClapperCast. It looked very different, and maybe we've had different iterations and kind of eras of the podcast since then, but we are coming up on our birthday. So as a birthday treat, I decided why not take this time to take our Patreon bonus episode for February, and instead of putting it behind the paywall, we are going to make it available wide. We are making this, putting it on the feed. Obviously, you're watching it now, but as a way to give back to all of our fans. Well, yes, we greatly appreciate everyone who's joined us on Patreon and supported the podcast. We wanted to give this as a little bit of a treat for everyone else. And also, maybe this is going to serve as a little incentive of these are the type of episodes that you can get over on our Patreon. It truly is just like more ClapperCast. So if you enjoy ClapperCast, patreon.com/ClapperCastPod. For just a few bucks a month, there's a few different tiers depending on what you want. Not only do we do these bonus episodes, but we do random bonus videos and such. But if this is something that interests you, again, for just a couple bucks a month, you can join and you can support us on Patreon and get access to these bonus videos. If you only care about the audio for these bonus episodes, it's also available on Spotify subscriptions through our Spotify page. So you can just click the Spotify feed, scroll down, and you will see the bonus episode every single month, and you can just click in and it will take you through that process. But also, if this is not enough and you're like, well, I don't really know if I fully want to commit to a subscription, that is fine. You can go through our list of available episodes and either individually purchase any episode, or what I would recommend, and I think a lot of people don't know that we do this, is if you subscribe as a free member, so you can subscribe for completely free, we have a selection of our bonus episodes that are available for free members. Specifically, if you go to posts on our Patreon, our pinned post is called Monthly Bonus Episode Complete List, and any episode that has a little star next to it is available for free members. So our Megalopolis review is available, our Shape of Water review is available, our John Waters double feature is available, our John Couture double feature, our Wonka review, our A Bigger Splash review. All those episodes are available for you right now. You can access fully as a free member. You don't even, I think, have to put in your card information. I think you can literally just sign, don't quote me on that, but I believe you could just sign up for free. So I just think sometimes we're not necessarily the best at kind of explaining what is on the Patreon or tying the Patreon into the main feed. So I just want to take this brief little moment to kind of plug the Patreon, especially because this is a freebie for everyone. But I hope everyone enjoys our review, our Best Picture Rewind episode of Cavalcade. Now let's get on to the review. Hello and welcome to ClapperCast. I'm your host as always, Carson Timar, and today for our Patreon bonus episode for February 2026, we are looking at Cavalcade. Yes, we are continuing our Best Picture Rewind series by jumping into Frank Lloyd's Cavalcade, one of the worst Best Picture winners according to a lot of people. This is one of the least popular Best Picture winners according to Letterboxd, and today myself, Jakub Flasz, and the good Hilary White are joining forces to discuss this project. Is this truly as disastrous as people claim, or is there some genius here as we follow a rich family through 30 years of their lives going through different trials and tribulations? I think this is a very fun episode, especially if you've seen Cavalcade. I'm not necessarily saying you have to go watch it beforehand, but we do spoil some little reveals here and there, and just overall I think though this is a very fun episode. I've never definitely had an episode of ClapperCast where we talk about Hitler this much. So without further ado, let's get to our full Best Picture Rewind episode on Cavalcade. Okay, Jakub and Hillary, thank you so much. Continuing our Best Picture Rewind series today with Cavalcade. An interesting film to talk about. I don't think a lot of people talk about this one. Actually, a little stat here on Letterboxd. This is the least popular Best Picture winner of all time, and it has the third lowest average rating. So, you know, in classic ClapperCast fashion, we are here to talk about the films no one else wants to talk about. But before we get to Cavalcade and we get to the Sixth Academy
Uncut Gems episode.
No, literally, this is exactly, Jakub, you're here for a reason. I knew we needed to call on an expert. And I'm sure just like with Uncut Gems, you're going to give this like 5 stars. But we'll get there. Before we get to the 6th Academy Awards, just filling in this narrative as we continue. Between the last episode, we've had multiple Best Picture winners. The Broadway Melody, All Quiet on the Western Front, Grand Hotel, Cimarron. All those films have won Best Picture since then, but now we are in the 6th Academy Awards, March 16th, 1934 at the Ambassador Hotel, hosted by Will Rogers. Very interesting. This is the longest eligibility period in Academy Award history to date. If you remember from our Wings episode, Academy Awards started with halfway through the year with eligibility. It wasn't like January 1st through December 31st like we have now. This is the Academy Awards that fix that. So we actually have the longest, again, eligibility period, August 1st, 1932, all the way to December 31st, 1933. From here on out until we get to COVID, it's going to be that very clean January to December. As far as nominations go, we have a tie for first place. Cavalcade, A Farewell to Arms, and Lady for a Day all got 4 nominations. I Am a Fugitive from the Chain Gang and Little Women got 3. As far as wins, Cavalcade takes the cake here with 3 wins. The next highest is A Farewell to Arms with 2. As far as Best Picture, we have 10 films nominated. We obviously have Cavalcade, but also we have 42nd Street, A Farewell to Arms, Fugitive from the Chain Gang, Lady for a Day, Little Women, The Private Life of Henry VIII, Some Done Him Wrong, and State Fair. So with that, let's get into Cavalcade. Again, nominated for a bunch. Outstanding Picture, Best Directing, Best Actress, and Best Art Direction. Won for all but Best Actress. Released April 15th, 1933. Had a premiere earlier in the year, but based on the 1931 play. A controversial film in some ways. It pushed the Hays Office before the Hays Code was strictly enforced. Pushed that due to some of the language throughout, but pretty quickly with Gone with the Wind, that's going to be thrown out the window anyway. An instant hit, both in the US and in the UK. People loved Cavalcade, including people maybe we don't love. Kind of infamously, this is known as Hitler's favorite film, so that's not excellent. But you know what? It's, you know, a cinema fan.
It's a Blu-ray blurb.
Pretty much. Had a very long road to home release. It actually won. This is so popular that in 2013, Fox was like, what film do you want us to finally release out of like everything we've released that was old? And Cavalcade won a write-in vote. Enough people were like, we need to see Cavalcade, that it finally got released. And yeah, like I mentioned, the least popular Best Picture winner on Letterboxd, about 8,000 views and ratings behind the next lowest and the third lowest average rating. So is Cavalcade really one of the worst Best Picture winners in history, or are people being a little bit unfair? Let's talk about it today. Jakub, as our guest today, I would love to throw it over to you first.
Oh my God.
What are your thoughts? You're also from the UK, so that's great. What are your thoughts on Cavalcade?
Look, I mean, I'll answer your first question already. I'll say, like, this is not the worst Best Picture winner, because in a competition where the greatest show on earth is one of the contestants, you can't win. And Oliver could go. And The English Patient could go. And Chariots of Fire. You know, the 80s were grim, by the way.
We'll get there.
Well, yeah, there's time. But Cavalcade, I had never seen this before. This was the first time watch. And yeah, you know, this is a movie that I kind of like. Okay, I think the story surrounding it, I think it's way more interesting than the movie itself, because I will probably say this. Like, 2 thoughts I had while I was watching this. One, this is like Downton Abbey of its time.
Oh yeah,
you know, this is Downton Abbey of its time, pretty much. And also, this kind of looks like the Tinseltown sort of establishment trying to rehabilitate Daniel Griffith. You know, this is because he had been disgraced for a while after he realized, like, holy shit, my movie kind of just revived the KKK. It's not a good look for anyone, is it? You know, and then he made Intolerance, and I think he was essentially driven out of the town on, you know, like in a handcart, right? But and they gave him an honorary Oscar in 1936. But this movie looks sort of like this is a movie that D.W. Griffith would have directed in like 1921. You know, and I kind of take it as such. So a lot of technical achievement. I will say that I can say this is that it's worth to watch it specifically for that, like in editing, dissolves, this kind of like montage, just getting the passage of time in a visually interesting way. That's sort of where this movie shines. Storytelling wise, that's kind of where I have a problem, because since it kind of looks like a throwback to Griffith, the movie looks like it was written in 1921. Like it has very like in a year that has like Frank Capra's already out wilding, you know, the screwball comedies are out, you know, and still and we're in pre-code as well. Like this movie is pre-code in that, you know, you get to see a woman wearing a slip, and there's a man looking at her, and there are people kissing, you know. So even though I think the code was already in place, it's just no one was really enforcing it until I want to say 1934 or something like that. But yeah, I'll leave it at that. So like my feelings are kind of sort of two minds, like straight down the middle. I want to say the movie is kind of sort of weirdly mediocre, but there are things to appreciate about it. So I'll leave it at that. I hope this is fair.
Hillary, what do you think?
It's complicated, and I have to agree with Jakub. I haven't seen all the Best Picture winners, and I've never really taken that on or had much interest in seeing every Oscar winner. But with this one, it's not that bad, but it brought up a lot of questions. And I think mentioning D.W. Griffith is key here, because he is someone who I think was very good at illustrating how America wanted to see itself, which kind of goes in hand with the previous episode we did about Wings. Why did Wings win? And to a certain extent, it was about how America wants to see itself, and that's why this American film wins this American Film Best Picture award. And with Cavalcade, it's a little bit more off. There's things about it that definitely don't really apply to our sensibilities now, and it was overall just kind of a confusing, kind of staid, playing it safe, very conservative in some ways, view of American life, but through a British story as well. It's about British people as in and higher classes and lower classes. That was the first thing I wrote down. I said, "This is proto Downton Abbey." I almost said Downtown Abbey.
Downtown.
That's another meme. Yeah, and then of course Upstairs, Downstairs. There is some suggestion. I couldn't find a direct link that when Upstairs, Downstairs started in the UK, that it may have been based on the idea of Cavalcade, but I couldn't find any solid links. It's something that's on Wikipedia, and so with like no footnote where it's like, yeah, that makes sense, but no one is saying anything. It does seem like one thing is definitely influenced by the other, and I'm looking forward to getting more into the weeds about this, because I think, once again, Jakub brought up something very interesting. It's more intriguing to dig around into the edges, or the how and the why this was made and what was exactly going on at the time, rather than the film itself. I think the film is what it is. And I'm also very surprised that it is the lowest rated. I thought that would be Broadway Melody. I kept hearing really bad things about Broadway Melody.
Correct. Broadway Melody is atrocious. Would not recommend. We skipped it for a reason. I kind of love Cavalcade in some ways. I think it's a pretty bad film overall. Like, I'm not a fan of this movie, but whenever I have a friend, and I've had multiple friends who would go and like, okay, now I'm going to watch all the Best Picture winners, I just kind of can't wait for them to get to Cavalcade, because in some ways this film is like very campy. It's very entertaining. Look at this family for 30 years as they go through just hell, as they witness history, they experience history, both positive and just full on tragedy. there are some choices here. Specifically, there's a reveal on a boat, is all I will say right now, which I think is like
Yep.
kind of peak cinema, where like I cannot watch that scene, and it's this heartbreaking, beautiful monologue, and you then cut to that, and it's one of like the funniest like remember me moments in history. I love that scene. Again, not a big fan of this, though. I also like completely understand why it was like a big hit. I understand why this won Best Picture. Understand why people like this. Looking at this like yearning for like in the middle of a changing world, in the middle of a changing life, in the middle of hardship in society, seeing this family go through all these emotions. I'm sure a lot of people at the time looked at this film and they saw themselves. They saw their family. They saw their family that got lost. They saw them and where they were in the world when they heard the news of all these historic events. The actual viewing experience, though, for me, is just like pretty boring. Like outside of these funny moments where you kind of in every scene are waiting to see like what shocking historical event is going to happen now. It's a very, very dull family. I think some of the monologues are good. I liked it better on a rewatch actually than on a first viewing. I also must mention Una O'Connor, I believe her name is. I think people mostly would recognize her from Universal Monsters. She was in Invisible Man. She was in Bride of Frankenstein. She might be my least favorite actor of all time because she has no ability to do anything but scream and screech on the screen. And it's just like truly was a jump scare the first time I watched this. I was like, no, not you. I like had to pause it and make sure it was her. And I think now I have a policy where I'm just going to avoid any film that she's in if I can, because it truly just does not work with my brain. So I guess it is an interesting film because like, again, I don't like the movie, but I do like see it and I appreciate it weirdly for what it is. Not necessarily saying like I endorse it entirely. I also can totally see why Hitler loved this because it is very much so like God, white life is like white families kind of like went through it and are struggling and just like we need to pick it up, which is going to be his entire like moral philosophy as he leads into World War II and the Holocaust. So, like that's pretty brutal and drastic, but like I get it. So I don't know. I have a lot of mixed emotions, I guess, around it.
Yeah, I mean, there's something interesting about like when you mentioned this is like Hitler's favorite film, and I was just like, I wonder like why. I was just like, oh, there's so many white people in it.
I actually I have to
you see the so
I actually looked into this because I thought this makes no sense. This makes no sense. It's on Wikipedia, and I know it's like the most popular review on Letterboxd right now that it's his favorite film. Dumb motherfucker. So I while I was watching, I thought, why would he like this? This doesn't make sense. And then I went down this rabbit hole. With Wikipedia, there's 2 links saying that this is his favorite film. Both of them are dead. And then I just started looking into his relationship with film, when he actually watched these films and why. And here's my theory. I don't think this is his favorite film. And there's an author, his last name is Niven. He wrote an entire book about Hitler's relationships to films and watching them as far as like for enjoyment and also for propaganda purposes. So he didn't watch Cavalcade until it won Best Picture. So he watched it, let's see, the ceremony was March 16th, and then he watched it in March and May with Goebbels. I think that the reason why he watched this film more than once was that they were studying it for propaganda purposes, and it probably had some influence over the films that came out later. The Triumph of the Will came out in 1935. But as far as his favorite films, they're very tacky. They're kind of funny. Another one that is brought up a lot is King Kong. Niven said there was no evidence that he was majorly into King Kong, although it would make psychological sense why he would like that film so much.
Return to Monkey.
Yeah, or it's just like, Germany is the ape and like no one understands and it's like lashing out at everyone. There's just a lot of psychology that people can project onto why he would like that. But it seemed what he liked was Mickey Mouse.
Sure.
He liked Laurel and Hardy. He liked Fritz Lang epics, and he seemed to really like Gone with the Wind. I think he'd ended up watching that a few times, and I think he wanted Germany to make a Gone with the Wind. I don't think it's because he necessarily liked the content of it. And then the other one that's kind of in the either is Snow White, that he really likes Snow White, but I couldn't find much about that. So as far as it's interesting that this information has gone so far, that this film, this kind of boring film, there's not, it's kind of dry a little bit, would be one of his favorite films. It's kind of like, well, yeah, like he was probably dry and boring, which may be true.
Like,
But it's just interesting digging around a little bit. It's like, oh my God, that's actually not what his favorite film at all. There's no real direct evidence. If you Google Hitler and Cavalcade, just in general, or even use some Boolean logic, you'll find him mentioned with Cavalcade as far as like people watching Cavalcade in 1933 and being terrified because they knew that he was coming to power and that there was anxiety roiling as far as like, well, here we are at the end of this story with this family. What's going to happen next? It's Hitler.
That's kind of what I thought when the film kind of finished, when these two people are like they lost all their children and they're like, well, that's a good year, wasn't it? And, and I was just saying like, oh, we just survived all this. And then little do they know.
No, they have no idea. And they kind of frame it as like, what's so scary about the future is it's like loosening morals and people aren't going to church and, oh my God, there's gay people exist. And we're just totally spinning out of control, which I think is the way that a lot of people feel no matter what time period they live in. And especially as they get older and time seems to accelerate a lot more, it just seems like everything is going off the rails for some people. I kind of could see that, but there isn't much about the rising tide of fascism, that's actually around the corner. And maybe the whole Hitler thing, what people are writing about as far as historical context, it's stuff that we know now, but I doubt that Noel Coward and the people who, the filmmakers involved with this, were thinking, we're going to make a statement like we know what's happening. It seems like they're about to get blindsided. And they did get blindsided.
Although Noel Coward, I think the play this is based on, this is from like 1930 or 31. So I think when they were staging this in theaters, then this essentially just finished at 1931. So I don't know how much prescience I would give them sort of credit for. Like thematically though, like still on Hitler, right? you can maybe see how this could appeal to him, although I have a feeling this may be more of an urban legend than anything else. Like the idea of destiny or sacrifice, or like a family essentially just sacrificing its children or just losing a lot along the way. There's like in the Nazi ideology, or the Nazi sort of like, well, not ideology per se, but the sort of the driving force, the sort of the just seeking retribution or some validation is rooted in this sort of idea that these people have lost way more than they should have, right? And also there's the romance of the 19th century kind of imperialism that's kind of baked into this, because it starts with these two people going to serve in the Second Boer War, which is also a fun little tangent. There's a little rabbit hole you can go onto if you want, just to see how about the importance of it, because this movie kind of traces the first 3 decades of the 20th century, and the Second Boer War is essentially kind of like a trial run for the horrible shit that's going to happen in the 20th century,
I agree. That's a war that's not taught in America. We don't learn about it. So I had to sit down and actually learn about the Second Boer War. I'd heard about it kind of abstractly over the years, but reading about it didn't surprise me at all. It's just pretty much, let's go there and just try to take control of things and assert our power. It might have been, some people might see it as a last gasp of that kind of warfare.
I mean, it wasn't. It was a last gasp of the sort of, "Hey, let's go to war. It's gonna be fun, boys." That was probably one of the last gasps. Although, like the last gasp of that kind of mentality was 1914, unfortunately, because the only country that went into First World War prepared for what the future held was Germany. Right, everyone else were like wearing caps with sabers. They were charging into artillery and machine gun fire, and they were realizing like a month and just like, I think how we're doing this isn't working anymore, guys. We need to we have to rethink our strategy. Give people helmets and stuff, But in the Second Boer War, you had this idea of, as you say, like the idea of going to war because you need to reassert your power as an empire, And actually at all cost, because these people they were fighting, the Boers, they were like undersupplied, under resourced. They were fighting like guerrilla tactics and whatnot. So the Brits essentially enabled these sort of like the scorched earth policy, just punishing civilian population, putting them in concentration camps, which they invented for the purpose of that war. that's kind of what this whole thing is the best known for, right? And also the role of the press as well in uncovering some of that shit. There's this woman, Emily Hobhouse, who was because Britain has always had independent press, and which is kind of a problem for the government, because they couldn't, like, I don't know, unify the propaganda sort of machine, because the press would just do their own thing. They would send war correspondents, they would uncover this kind of nonsense, and they would report it back, and people had, like, the empire went into massive trouble over this. There was massive parliamentary scrutiny over this. But yeah, that's an interesting, because like that's how it starts, with the sort of last gasps of a dying empire, when people still think they can just accomplish something. And you can see how these people, like these Downton Abbey sort of downstairs upstairs sort of people of different classes, how they respond to changing times, and how you can see how at the end of it there's essentially one clear winner out of this, because you don't even see the servants anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's an interesting sort of like digging around the edges. That's what's interesting about this movie. And I want to say, like, in terms of how this movie was a massive success, you kind of have to also remember this movie took a while to make. Right? I think they were shooting it in London for the most part, but it took a long while. And I think it's also important to take into consideration that the 1929 depression didn't hit Hollywood immediately. It took a while. I think only by like 1933, studios started feeling like, yeah, it's not good, guys, because they just generated so much money over the years. They could almost pretend that this didn't really apply to them, right? But by 1933, they actually had to. So it almost feels like a movie that otherwise wouldn't have been produced, because no one would have risked this much money if they had not greenlit this like before, you know. So it kind of feels like a dying sort of gasp of this sort of the old epic that they no longer could afford, because at that time, like screwball comedies, B movies, these genre films, you know, like the Laura and Hardy stuff, that's much cheaper to make, and that's the kind of movie that essentially takes over for a number of reasons. But that would be one of the reasons. Would be it's just cheaper to produce. So, you know, that's probably one of the cool reasons to kind of imagine that this is for people to say like, oh, this is what movies used to be like, you know.
Yeah, and at the same time, though, I'll say, like, I think thematically, the Oscars at this point, and we talked about this with Wings, and I think it applies here also, it really is reflecting on, like, 2 or 3 years previously and reflecting on the emotions from that. When you look at this Best Picture lineup, not that I've seen everything from it, but, like, you have State Fair, Lady for a Day. These are very much so films that, like, especially State Fair, which I would not recommend on my worst enemy unless you really love fairs. But like, it is like this nostalgic looking back at like what was society before we got into all this craziness, whether or not you value that craziness, or whether you value like how Hollywood was changing with the Great Depression and suffering. I think Cavalcade is very much so that, where it's like, this is what we had, and now look at all these events and how this social progress and change like ruined that and hurt that and took these kids away from their parents. And I think in a 2026 perspective, this might seem a little bit out of touch in some ways, or it might seem a little bit out of place. But I think at the time, what I've realized is like these emotions and this like perspective was very, very relevant as far as with Hollywood at the time, was something they were very quick to recognize and celebrate. And I think a lot of people felt that way. Like, it's interesting, like, not to bring back Hitler. We don't need to talk about Hitler much more in this episode. This is the most Hitler forward episode.
Here we are, still on it.
So what? This came out, this Academy Awards was in 1933. He rose to office in 1933, I believe. Like, his entire, like, propaganda machine was based around like, we have suffered because the Treaty of Versailles and, you know, the Weimar Republic and how that economically collapsed. Like, we need to find someone to blame and use that as a scapegoat to like making Germany great again and making the society like financially healthy. Like, I think a lot of like those ideals, if you look at Cavalcade in this element of like how society and social progress ultimately failed, like this pretty innocent family who was just kind of trying to celebrate New Year's and trying to get by. I think a lot of that thematically would resonate with that type of narrative. Like, I think it does feel to me very, very much like a product of its time. Very similar to like Wings we looked at, and it was like, oh, this is clearly reflecting on well, I mean, obviously the plot is World War One, but it's reflecting on this evolution of war and the emotions of war. Same with All Quiet on the Western Front, which we had between these. I think this feels very socially aligned with how the Academy had rewarded those best pictures, in my opinion. So I get why it was a big success. And again, based off the play, they actually filmed the play and then used that as reference when making the movie, which is cool.
Some of these songs, they were used from an actual live stage performance.
Yes, in London, I believe. Yeah.
Yep.
So I don't know. Like I think it's interesting to kind of have this like time capsule to like a society and a social also class of society and how you look at wealth in the film, that I think did resonate with a lot of people.
The issue I've had with this is that if we're going to contrast with Wings, is that the difference between Wings and Cavalcade is that in Wings, the characters have agency and they have accountability. Characters make choices in Wings that have consequences, and there's complicated emotions that they go through, either through witnessing loss or causing loss, or just the theater of war, what that does to a person. With Cavalcade, there's a passivity that I find very, very troubling, where it seems at the end, like I looked into the play, I have not seen the play perform, but just seeing how the play was laid out and what they show on stage, it's very much, look at all these things that happen to us. We're the victim, but look at us. Aren't we great? Look at us. Look at all the sacrifices we made. But there's not really any accountability or any strong feelings about things. They do lose their children, but you don't see their funerals. They kind of talk about them a little bit. Everything is just very, very kind of closed off emotionally, which I know does relate to the time period it's taking place in, and also British culture, not showing a lot of outward emotion. But it does seem a little bit strange to me, especially these scenes where things kind of butt up against each other, like their eldest son dies on the Titanic. That's what that big reveal is, that he and his wife or fiance is on the Titanic right before it goes down. And then
such a classy, by the way, such a classy moment.
Yeah, very. When you said "remember me" earlier, Carson, I've seen that related to this so many times, where it's like, okay, every 100 years there's going to be a scene like that, and but then later, right before the war, there's this attitude like, we're going to war. This is so exciting. I can't wait to go to the war. Can't you, Papa? And then they're just like, I wish that my brother was here, so he could die in the war too. Because I mean, we know what's going to happen. We know it's all kind of these cliches. It's just very, I don't know. What did you guys think about this? But that to me was really troubling.
See, it is troubling from our perspective because we have now in our collective memory 2 massive world wars and a string of smaller conflicts that are just as bloody or more, right? By those standards, like World War, well, this is kind of what I don't necessarily understand when it comes to like this being written in 1931, which is after World War One. This was a war that actually knocked everyone unconscious. Like the entire world was like, the world's gone mad. We've never seen anything like this, because like no one's ever imagine in I don't know, what was it, like August 1914, all of a sudden like 7 countries essentially launch military operations in self-defense all at once, and in the first weeks there's like 500,000 people dead. That's or something to that effect. It's just never been seen. But still they just like there is this sort of, maybe this is kind of why I would appeal to like a conservative mindset, because you can see like all these people saying like, look what we've gone through. By the way, like how many shitty things can happen to one family, right? There's just like, they boarded the Titanic, one ship, and it's just like, it's, I mean, I get like this, there haven't been like a regular sort of, like you couldn't just like take the afternoon ship, this was the one that you had to take and then, or just take one, I don't know, 4 weeks later, right? But they all say like, look at the things that happened. We lost our children and we are, and then, but the sort of what's not being said, but what's left, I want to say in subtext is, but we're here, right? There must be a reason, and that the concept of destiny that appeals to the conservative minds, and this is probably why Hitler would love that, because the idea of national cultural ideological destiny is baked into that sort of. we have suffered so much, there must be a reason. We will be vindicated. We will emerge victorious at the end. It's just you don't see the emergence of them victorious because all they do is drink champagne and just the film fades to black, right? But that would be kind of sort of the lifting your spirits comes from that, not from what we would see like humanists, some kind of emotional response to something, because these people should be wallowing in tragedy really, because they've lost everything, nearly everything. All they have is each other, but they almost pretend like they did, like their kids never existed, you know. But what I want to say, their denial comes from that, you know, we've lost our sons probably for a reason, and the reason is like greater good, the glory of the empire, you know, that kind of shit, which is completely alien to me. Like as a human being now, the idea of you know, just feeling good that my children died in a war would be just it's incomprehensible to me, right? I could understand that there's an idea of like, well, I lost my children in a war, and I don't know, maybe this was for a good cause, but I'm a wreck now, you know. But they don't, right? Because like, this is what we get for, like, I don't know, discussing a movie that's nearly 100 years old, right? Because there's just these mindsets are completely mind-blowingly different.
People are still like that though.
I
Like
know,
not to be like not just with war. I don't. This is gonna be. I'm sorry for another like tangent, but like this week I was seeing this quote about this mom who like refused to get their kid vaccinated, and they're like dying now. They have like a whole brain tumor and stuff, and she's like, "No, this is how it's meant to be. Like it's just this is okay. This is I'd rather this than the vaccination." So like people still like don't care about their kids like that, and war is a huge complex, obviously, with that to this day. It's very bizarre, yeah.
See, that sort of idea of like, well, this is almost like an expression of privilege in many ways. Sorry for this becoming like a tangent, right? Because this mentality of like people refusing vaccination, this is exclusive to developed world. Like you will not hear a conversation like this in Bangladesh. You will not hear this because you know what? When you see children die from measles, polio, and shit like this, then you'll understand that the medicine works, and there's no conversation. Like it's the sort of the champagne sort of socialist sort of worldview of, you know, maybe we don't need the police. We look, it's so safe in our gated community while I'm just sipping prosecco in my hot tub, you know. Maybe we just don't need to pay attention. Let's go on Instagram, hashtag defund the police, you know, because it doesn't concern me. That's the sort of like, you know, like I don't give like people who say like I'm not vaccinating my children, they have been vaccinated, by the way, because their parents weren't idiots.
Yeah, so, it's that's once again it's an entirely different tangent, but it runs parallel in some ways to this kind of mode of thinking, this ethos. One of the things that about the play that I found interesting is that the play ends with like a cacophony of like all the chaos of 1929, but not the depression, because like that would be too depressing, but you know, just like moral decay, blah 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 blah. And then in the play they just project the British flag on the stage, and everyone comes out and sings I want to make sure I'm saying the right. They come out and sing God Save the King. That's a manipulation. That's propaganda at that point. And it was really interesting. I looked at Noel Coward a little bit because I thought, wait, this is a playwright who was gay, but then I found out he was also conservative. And he said he also believed that there should be no propaganda in the theater, but there's no way that can be true. His political beliefs are surfacing in the construction of how Cavalcade works on stage, and then how that translated to the screen. And the other troubling thing about that, we've been talking a lot about the kind of the toast at the end, the champagne, you know, like we lost our sons, we sacrificed a lot. What now, Britannia? But the lower class people, they've kind of faded away from the narrative altogether. And I found that troubling, that in Coward's mind, whether it's conscious or not, these people cannot rise or have anything good happen to them. I know that Ellen is somewhat of an opportunist and not a very likable character. And then Alfred, apparently, it's kind of, I don't know if it's implied just because of his class and position that he couldn't hold together and fell into alcoholism and had to die in this horrific way. But Fanny, Like it's like Fanny is just a nightclub singer, and obviously her life is going to be miserable. There's this implication that they can't go anywhere either, and they just kind of have to accept it, and they just kind of disappear. But what matters at the end is the British family, the one with the money. They lost family, correct? We were talking about privilege. They lost their children, which is absolutely horrendous. However, they never questioned anything. They never fought back against anything. They never spoke up. They never really said very much about it. But they're not affected financially. They're still in the same home. They're still in really comfortable clothes. Everything is pretty much the same. They're in a safe neighborhood. And it's just kind of, like, what next? But it's just leaving out a huge part of the picture. It's just focusing on a very idealized version of reality. And that, for me, it made more sense to me once I started researching around things. And I know I've been talking about, like, I having to read about Noel Coward and the Second Boer War and about Hitler not liking King Kong as much as people think. But when I was just watching the film, I'm glad that I had some awareness where it got to a certain point and I thought, this is just propaganda. It has to be propaganda, but why? Why, like, and who is it for?
Look, I think this is propaganda. I want to say, like, typically sort of British propaganda, because like it's easy to see something like, oh, this is just the American dream. It's nonsense, right? Like, you can see this in like a lot of Capra films, right? This idea of just venerating this idea of, like, you can make yourself into anything if you work hard and believe hard enough, something's gonna happen, But well, I want to say until like 60s, like now it's a little bit different. Like, now, British society now is like more economically conservative than it is socially conservative. By and large, I want to say, like, Brits are very liberal when it comes to social stuff, but quite conservative when it comes to money. Well, now this is like the landscape's changing. Like, this is a whole different conversation. But like back in the day, they would have been quite a bit more socially conservative. So you can see this is the propaganda is for, like, well, what endures is this. This is what, like, the gentlemanly ladyship, like this, the Downton Abbey facade. This is what always will endure, because it's kind of sort of in the brick and mortar that goes into building these things. You go to Oxford and you're surrounded by buildings that are like 1,000 years old, and you can kind of see how so many people have lived here, and this shit's still around. Or you can, like, in here you kind of get a little bit more of like an appreciation of, like, where this is coming from, because, like, whenever people do like random, like, I don't know, work on some road, they'll dig out, oh shit, like, we've dug into the old Roman road underneath this road, because the ancient Romans in like 100 BC they've built this road first, and now we have to, like, clear it with some government agency or whatever. So that, like, history is kind of like a bit more embedded in here than, like, I want to say Americans would be able to, like, conceptualize. And I think that's kind of it. The sort of idea of, like, how this movie is appreciated and what it's trying to venerate and what it's trying to idealize is that the sort of the enduring social conservatism, as in, like, stiff upper lip, where, like, whatever happens, the English lineage will always kind of prevail, and maybe at the same time it is coming from the perspective of some kind of like social privilege as well, because you'll never see like a well-to-do rich person falling into alcoholism. It's always the poor guy.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because rich people can handle their liquor, and then they know when to stop and whatever. But no, this guy is actually he can't handle himself, right? Because there's also this prevailing, and that's also typically British in many ways. That if someone's rich, that means they're smart and they're better than you. So by symmetrically, that also means that if you're poor, you're probably stupid. So, and it kind of just like almost perpetuates this, because if you're poor, you're probably stupid, therefore you deserve to be where you are. So that kind of almost just calcifies this class structure where social mobility just does not exist in like a 1930s, 1920s Britain. No, you're born and you die where you were. Like there's no such thing as lifting yourself by your bootstraps.
Mm.
Well, with the death of Joe, it's really interesting as a plot point to point out that it serves both of those messages, which is how can we hurt this rich family further and make it seem more tragic? That's like the fainting scene, which some people pointed out was quite campy and that was a laugh.
Do people I've asked it a question. I've asked this question like a lot. I think when did women stop fainting in public?
I'm a woman who's fainted in public a lot, and let me tell you, it's not like the movies. It's always it's a disaster. I have like some sort of haven't been diagnosed with anything, but it's never the way it's portrayed in the movie.
This woman is just receiving like a strongly worded letter, and all of a sudden curtains, like she's gone, narcolepsy.
Yeah, but it serves the it's the tragedy of her passing out, and then also preventing Fanny from marrying Joe, and being able to get anywhere in life. There can't be a marriage between those two classes. So
because social mobility doesn't exist. Like the idea of like Prince William marrying a commoner, that was a big deal, for instance, and that's in like 2009, whatever. It just doesn't happen. Like people wrote books about that kind of stuff. Like, oh, it would have been like this is like the Bronte sisters and Jane Austen. This is all about that kind of shit. Oh, wouldn't it be cool to like romance like a brutish farmer and shit? Well, these women just like sit on like in Bridgerton style. They sit like one plays the piano, the other one just like imagines shit from the comfort of her ivory tower, just surrounded by beautiful things and servants. And they say like, I'm going to write a book, and this book is going to be about, this guy outside my window. He just flings horseshit all day. I wonder. It will be something to be ravaged by this smelly man, and they just but then they will always just be courted by lords and whatever, and just married off in arranged sort of situations to like some other lords and barons and whatever. That's kind of where it comes. Like there's very little intersection between these classes, and they don't even think it's like you can't allow that. It's like, what do you mean? Like they're in love? Oh, this is not going to happen because he can like the implicit sort of like from what's her name? Ellen? No, not Ellen. Jane. The implicit sort of information to Ellen would have been like, no, he can do better than this.
Yeah,
he can do better than your daughter. Which is like, bitch, what did you just say to me? This is the, But for us, this is incomprehensible. This is just impossible to imagine how you could actually say this to anyone. But for them, this was like, no, this is how we play this game.
I was just thinking all these jokes like, you can't marry him. He's slightly lower class, that kind of thing going on where it's not, he may even be rich, but he's not rich enough. I think that probably does exist in some circle somewhere, but overall, I agree with you. It's just not really, it's not really a thing anymore as far as just, I'd say 98% of the planet.
I will say it exists. In here, it exists. It's just way more subtle. It's a little bit different. As in, well, maybe the parents, like when you send your kid to school, they will just hang out with other people, not with you. Or whenever, well, you'll get the invite to a birthday party, but then you won't get invites to sleepovers because everyone gets the invite to a birthday party, even though like your kids could be best friends for a little while, and they won't because someone's mom is gonna do the sort of the work behind the scenes, and all of a sudden like your kid loses a friend and you don't know why, and she doesn't know why, or he doesn't know why. No, this is because you don't belong, or just some like if you're like of Indian, it's like this is some a guy like one of my ex neighbors. He told me this, like someone actually said this to him like at a school event. Like walk up to them and very quietly, it's just, you'd be probably much better off if you just hung out with your own. Like this is very, very polite, but brutal racism and classism is still alive and well. It's just, in America, it's slightly different because it's kind of, I want to say it's stratified different. In here, it's kind of still stratified along the same lines because this tradition still kind of persists. So it's, you can you can do well, you can get, I don't know, rich, you can be prosperous, you can do whatever, but in some places you will just not belong. And there will be
Yeah.
always stuff like, there will be this line that you will never cross, as in like, no, your kid cannot marry my kid because I'm better.
Yeah, and it's overall, I think that's one of the conservative messages of the movie. It's very broad. I'm painting with really broad strokes here, but it's like change is scary. Everything should stay the same. And isn't it just a shame that anything changed whatsoever?
I'm
There
pretty
there
sure
is
this
a
is
little
like the
bit
end
of
of
that
British
in
anthem somewhere.
Cavalcade, which I find a little. It makes me like step back a little bit and be a little bit repelled by it.
Yeah. It is repulsive for like for our mindset. Like I don't know, of I want to say like young to middle aged people in 21st century. It's just bananas, right? Maybe it would be different for Gen Alpha kids who are now being brought up in this massively tribalized, very polarized world where they don't know any different. They don't know what it was like,
Mm-hmm.
in the 90s, where kids were just like, where it was like, no, we're all, like, we don't see color. We don't, like, come and play with us. Can I be your friend? Like this, like, it's just, well, does your dad, like, who does he support? Oh, we're a Trump house. Okay. That's, yeah, kids. I don't know what it's gonna look like in like 10 to 15 years when these kids grow up. But I want to say, yeah. And at this point, like, I don't understand why this movie is like so beloved as well. Like, is this just because it was such a big movie of its time, or maybe like some people would be watching it in like repertory theaters and whatever, and they'll be like, "Wow, this is like an old like, no, like, why? What is the appeal? Or is this like people in the 60s were like, they're showing Hitler's favorite movie at the cinema?
Trump is like, get on TV.
What weird shit
Trump
was
is
he
like,
into?
turn it on.
Yeah. But you bring up a really good point, and this is something the film actually made me think about. It's something useful I was able to walk away with, although this specific time period and what we're talking about doesn't necessarily apply to us. Like you said, it's almost been 100 years. But it's something that I sat with a lot considering this film. And then, of course, there's this just constantly shifting, cyclone of information that we're getting and things to think about. But I was kind of sitting there and thinking to myself, as far as like children growing up, or we're I don't want to say victims of this too, but it happens to every generation. If you never had it, did you ever really lose it? And I think that when you see generations coming up behind you, you're more aware of what they're losing or what is changing so rapidly that they're just not going to know the difference. And Cavalcade has a little bit of that itself. It doesn't really address it, but it did make me think about things in terms of even just really simple things like electricity or transport. I think they do bring up like planes a little bit. It's kind of like this detail, like, oh, I'm going to fly from here to here. There's just certain things that drastically change during our lifetime, and it does make me think about how things changed for younger people back then who eventually became older people and everyone in between. And then contrasting that with today. One thing I did write down is what would have been more difficult as far as like a turn of the century and all the shocks and violence that people went through at the turn of the century in 1900 or 2000. And I don't have an answer. They're both just really, really hard periods of time to live through.
I think for many reasons, I think there will be similar. By the way, this is something I watched a YouTube video the other day about sort of my generation or our generation, because Hillary, we're kind of sort of the same age, yeah. Where where it's like we're not like Gen X and we're not millennials, we're Zennials, because like there's this very small piece of time, there's a very small gap between like late 70s and mid 80s, where if you were born in that time, you'll have had full-on childhood of analog variety. Like anything that I did in high school or didn't do is a rumor. It's there's no documentation of any shit that went down when I was a kid,
That's true.
There's plausible deniability of every single thing I may or may not have been engaged in, right? At the same time, when I in my 20s, all of a sudden, like, internet comes online with like in force, and all of a sudden I have social. Like I just had MySpace, AOL, Facebook, all that shit. I had a Gmail account when it was by invite. you know, but I have like one of the oldest Gmail accounts in existence. And there's this sort of time that like you can consider yourself almost lucky that you get to hold two worldviews in your head, and will be fine, because you understand what it feels to be like forward thinking, because you were very hopeful about technology and future and progress, and at the same time you understand what it's like to be bored, or what it's like to actually, if you have to go and see someone, you have to get on your bike and see them.
We also
There's no
talked
other
about
way.
being uncomfortable. Like, we were forced to be uncomfortable a lot.
Yes.
That came
Or
up a
when you
lot
had to,
during our last conversation.
you phoned a house phone, and then you had to get through the gatekeeper, or like mom or dad, when you had to go and I don't know, speak to your girlfriend or boyfriend. You had to go, and it's like, you had to just do the polite thing, because someone else is going to pick up the phone,
Mm-hmm.
And I think like the sort of the generations, these little small micro cohorts that also happen to live at the precipice of massive change, would have been probably beginning of the 20th century, and the sort of the silent or the greatest generation that also happened to come of age at the sort of like born somewhere during the depression or before the depression, so maybe they grew into depression, and then they had to go and fight a war as well.
Yeah,
So these will be the
absolutely.
two. So but yeah, like there, because most generations you don't get to see this of the before and after. You'll be kind of born into something, and this is something that will likely persist for as long as it takes for you to become an adult. So like, because like Gen Xers didn't have that sort of like, they're like more suspicious of technology, because they just like they're most of their entire childhood and enough of their adult life was analog, that they don't even consider this an option. This is just something that's weird and scary to them, right? And so
Maybe.
Yeah.
Depending on the Gen Xer.
Oh yeah, there's always, like, we're talking like in populations, so there's always a bell curve to everything, right? But yeah, I would agree that there's of the generation that came of age, I want to say, when they had to go to fight a war. Say, for instance, the kids in this film who actually go and die in that war. I can imagine they're being brought up in houses where it's talked about, like, with a certain pride, that you get to go to fight a war in a foreign land, and then you get to come back and tell stories, and you get to tell stories with medals, and your dad has a medal, and they have a rifle in the house, and they go and fight a war in 1914, and it's carnage. And
there's chemicals and machine guns and all of the stuff that just did not exist.
Yeah, so that would be the shock. It's just like one of the things that would be different for like our generation and their generations. Many of these people do not get to come back to actually just live a life.
That doesn't change. That. No, that has not changed at all.
Yeah, their lives would be shorter by that sort of token. But yeah. But I would say, like, conceptually, this is very similar. So I could maybe sympathize with that, as in like the idea of like, this is how rapidly the world has begun changing, and that's what this movie is trying to document. And to Noel Coward, like, just wait 100 years. This is cute, by the way.
Yeah,
I just think the issue is like, it is what you mentioned, Hillary, as far as like the projection of this family being one of just such privilege. Like, even especially now, and I was not obviously alive in 1900 to understand the dynamics of war, how war was viewed. But like, looking at this film now, it's very like, even to have the privilege of being like, war is fun. War is so good. You get to go, you get to murder a lot of people and just wreak havoc in these other countries. You can go to Africa and just like round them up in concentration camps. Like, it's so much fun. It's very hard to like find sympathy, I guess, for someone who I would say is so like, even if it is the predominant understanding at the time and experience at the time, and maybe morality was a little bit different with how we view people and view other countries, like, there's such privilege to that. Or like, oh my god, it's so difficult, this family, they just had to take this trip on the Titanic, and like, which is a pretty like rich ship. Like, it's just the issue with how this is aged. Yeah, I agree with Jakub. Like, narratively, I can get like conceptually understanding and relationship and sympathy with these characters in this family. But they come from such a point of privilege that, especially at the end, when the family is like, well, we've done all this, but it's for the nation and stuff, like, as I think you mentioned, Hillary, like, this family is still, like, these two are still pretty okay.
They're doing
they still
great.
have a nice house. They're okay. Like, yes, they've sacrificed their family, but ultimately their lifestyle is very much still intact. Like, it's just hard to, I guess, especially now, sympathize with that like level of privilege. I think that's probably why this has not aged to where more people find it relatable, because I think there is a lot on the core level that is relatable, but it's just the perception and the perspective is like so abrasive towards modern audiences.
I mean, it's kind of hard to relate to anyone in here apart from the sort of the downstairs family, right?
Yeah, maybe
Because-
Fanny, like a little
Maybe
bit.
Fanny, yeah. It is honestly difficult, right? Because like unless you're a 1%er, like it's for me, this is kind of like trying to relate to like Emerald Fennell's films. Just go away. But like this is a woman who's trying to convince me that she's, oh, you know, we're finding the good fight. Her father is like I don't know. He owns a jewelry empire. Like, what do you know about struggle, lady? Christ.
There's a few people out there that I feel that way about. I'm going to keep my mouth shut, but she's not alone. There's several of them. Yeah.
But this doesn't really get teased out in the film, but it's there, and I think that even the filmmakers and the screenwriter probably didn't necessarily want to press the issue. Like the Second Boer War is a pivotal moment because, in contrast to the first one, that one was kind of like, let's go to war. And it's not even like, oh, let's murder some people. Let's just fight, you know? Maybe someone's going to get wounded. They will surrender. We're going to just put them in handcuffs. And then at the end of it all, when everyone goes like, okay, peace, then we're going to exchange prisoners and everyone's going to go home. You're going to have a scar and it's going to be fine, you know? And you're going to have a story to tell, how you went to the war with your buddies and then you and expressed some courage and valiance and whatever. And the second one was kind of like, holy shit, this doesn't work anymore. But the idea was like that we can't really tell anyone what we did because it feels wrong. There's the scene where this dad, the lordship guy, who then gets knighted, right? He comes back and his sons go like, tell us a story, and he goes like, some other time. So boys, yeah, go off to bed, you know, because like I don't wanna say to my kids how we gunned down like an entire village because they refused to move, you know, or how we you know, set an entire town on fire because that was the policy, that was the order. We just scorched earth, sow salt into the ground, you know, that kind of shit. We're just like doing despicable things, and we're just it's not really that romantic now, is it? I can't tell my 5-year-old how I was courageous at war because I was pointing guns at women and children. This is not okay. It doesn't feel okay. But we're not saying anything. Smile, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just make it that. Just don't say anything. And if we don't say anything and we don't express anything, then it'll just go away. And as a person, I really dig in my heels about that. That to me is just not right. In our storytelling, and not to mention Wings again, but I mean, at least Wings does deal with that near the end. Where it's, you know, that it is about, you know, the main character coming home and everything works out for him. G isn't that great, but you know that in some ways he's never going to be okay. He's always going to be tortured or feel tortured about what happened over there.
And All Quiet on the Western Front also is very similar with like showing kind of the horrors of war compared to the expectations of it. It's definitely something on the mind for sure at this time. And I think especially after World War I, you're right, Yaka, where that is something that is like an active conversation. I don't necessarily think it's overly well represented in Cavalcade, but
no, it's almost like, well, they know it's there, but it's like, well, let's not make things sad for us, you know?
Yeah, like what can we leave out? The Depression in particular, like this is, like you said, it's 1930. Well, it's 1931, but by the time they're adapted in 1933, it was brought up in several pieces I read about it. You know, I think like even the AFI catalog where it said, you know, we're just going to pretend the Depression isn't there, and it was everywhere.
It is kind of weird overall. It's a film that has so much loss and tragedy to it, but like it really always is just like we got to keep our head up. Like it's for the greater good. Like it never really has a moment where it sits and it's just like it's gone too far and now we just exist in this depression. It's always just like we got to keep moving. We don't want this to be too sad, which is just weird that that's the vibe that this film, and I assume the play also takes when it's a story that is just like non-stop tragedy, basically. Like that is just what the plot is, but it never wants to be sad.
But still, it's okay,
Like it's crazy.
You know what?
Yeah.
If it was like pure escapism, I could probably after like financial crash or whatever, and people just producing now like Gossip Girl and Sex in the City of just like let's just look at the I don't know, sex adventures of the 1%ers, people who just don't have to worry about money. Let's just think Bridgerton. Let's watch Bridgerton in the post-pandemic world, where it's just everyone's nice. Slavery isn't a thing. They're like black people owning land. No, it's like fucking sci-fi, this thing. But and let's pretend that life around us doesn't really exist. I could even understand that because that's escapism. But this thing is like, life is shit, but let's rationalize.
Exactly. That's what, I can deal with the screwball comedies, the depression. I love those because they lifted people's spirits and it was escapism during the time. But Cavalcade, while watching it, it just seemed like
it's coping.
It's just justifying everything. And I thought that's not right. No, this is something that probably should be looked at with a little bit more nuance and some questions, some actually really hard questions.
Mamma Mia 3 is not going to stop every 5 minutes to be like, and now there's COVID. Like, it's just like, it doesn't, the identity of a property that is escapism does not match with the content of Cavalcade. So you do get this weird blend.
Yeah, exactly. So it's trying to be escapist in a way that it's trying to appeal to as many people as possible.
It's like a debate. It's like trying to make depressed rich people be like, it's actually okay. Yes, all this happened, but like you just gotta keep going.
Put a pall of it's like trying to sweeten all. Okay, I'm coming up with this in real time, so it's going to be a bit clumsy, but it's kind of like sweetening all the abuse you took on a macro level to nostalgia. Wasn't that great?
Yeah,
and it's terrible. Or like being at the end of I guess I'm like on a micro level. If I'm bringing it down to micros, like a horrible marriage with a lot of abuse, and the abuser dies, and it's like trying to put the other partner's frame of mind of like, yeah, that was terrible, but didn't you have some good times?
Like just the housemaid.
Yes.
Just going through this massive horror show, and at the end, like, how can I turn this into a business now?
It's actually trying to Stockholm syndrome its audience to be like, actually, you loved this. Remember how great it all was when your kids died. Remember when they went on the Titanic and that sunk and everyone died, like, all these people died. Good times.
This is the disgusting caveat to this is, but let's focus on the really rich people.
Because they're victims too. Don't you understand? They're victims too.
It's less fun if you can't still be in the rich house at the end, to be fair.
I know, it's just like, let's just show how they go through all this shit, but it's just like, at the end of it, this is a movie that should be retitled as like, can someone please think of the millionaires?
See, that's why I don't get the time why, especially in the US, when a lot of this is like very specifically British, I don't get why in the US this was such a hit with general audiences. I think it was like the number one film of the year as far as like box office. Like I don't get how it was an instantaneous like favorite of those who, number one, are not from Britain, number two, are not rich, like who are suffering from like the Great Depression and really seeing the venom of all these events in this time period. I don't get why.
I have a take on this. It may be totally wrong, but I think there's also a reason why things like Downton Abbey are extremely popular in the US, or because just the US does not necessarily have like there's this sort of longing for having some kind of like anchoring to some tradition, right? Which just naturally is there in this movie because it's in the British culture, right? This idea of like, ooh, Miss Ladyship, ooh, mama, papa. You don't have that in American tradition. It's more like, see, people wearing hats and speaking in the Atlantic sort of accent. That's all you get, right? That's, I think, what possibly could endear American like audiences to it, because this is something that just feels both alien and somehow enticing. There's a reason why, like, I don't know, if you go to London, so many Americans, and all they think about is, I want to see the Queen, I want to see the King, I want to go into Windsor Castle and just wave at them. Maybe they will see me, because it makes you feel like you're a part of something bigger and older.
Yeah, we don't necessarily have our own aristocracy, and so I
The
think with
Kardashians.
some of us, there is a hunger for that, where it's like, where's our royalty, or where's our myths? What should we romanticize as far as the king and the queen and the castle? I think that has carried over a little bit. So maybe there is some identification with American audiences, and then this really rich British family, but like you said, it's still happening. I mean, you brought up, the popularity of Downton Abbey, even Bridgerton to a certain extent, where
Yeah.
there's just this real romanticization of, well, I'll just watch these really rich people that I don't actually identify with, or it is very divorced from reality, and that's going to make me feel better or feel like I'm part of something. It's all very, it's not my mindset, so I'm very confused about that.
It's like, even in literary terms, there's very little in American literature that will actually anchor you to something like this. There's like Little Women, or something like that, right? But other than that, it's more like American culture is more of a working man's culture in some places, and also there's the sort of the exceptionalist mythos creeping in like the 30s. Like the superhero mythos is essentially the sort of the I don't know, like anthropomorphization of that sort of sentiment of, we need, like, we're a secular country with no tradition. We need our Greek mythology, so we're just inventing one as we go. I
Well, that
and
makes sense.
this Meanwhile, in Europe, where country, like I have a pub like next, close to where I live, that's just older than America. There's just like, we're more at home with stuff being old, stuff like traditions just being everywhere. Meanwhile, I think this just, and it doesn't appeal to us necessarily all that much because it's just everywhere. Meanwhile, it just becomes, like just the idea of like a London, like, or an RP accent is just attractive to Americans, because it's just, oh, people just speak in this, like, I don't know, refined way. And you hear someone speaking with a London accent, you immediately assume they are smart, and this is a big mistake to make.
I was talking about this with a friend the other day. He was just talking about what women find attractive, and I said, "Man, I've been around some women who will just almost get into a car with a stranger because he has a British accent
See,
or an Australian
no,
accent,
but
and I'm the friend who's
it
like,
has to
"What are you
be.
doing?" Or it's like, "Oh, he's going to take me to his boat. Where are you going?" "Oh, well, I mean, a boat. That's really romantic. Like, we'll go out on the scene, like, alone with some guy you just met. But his accent is really sexy. No, no, no. You're not going there. You're going to leave with me." And that's
Yep.
an actual thing. It is embedded
Yep.
in our culture.
Even the idea of calling it a British accent when there's like 250 accents in this small island, right?
Mm-hmm.
And only like 3 or 4 are sexy.
It all depends on how you perceive things. I hear accents and I think they're interesting, but I don't really think of them in terms of sexiness, which is probably why I was that friend who,
Yeah.
intervened.
See, but yeah, there's this sort of something, I don't know, magnetic about that sort of. Maybe that's why, or maybe there's also some incredible marketing on behalf of who produced this Fox.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, ladies out there, I'll just give you a life hack. You can turn your Siri on your phone to be whatever accent you want. So, as someone who had an Australian man in high school who would be his Siri every day, live your life is all I will say.
No, you can do that with your GPS too. There was one time I was driving around someone from Thailand and he was listening to the robotic English voice coming out of a GPS. And he said, "Well, can you change it to Thai?" And we did. And it horrified him so much he said, "Turn it off." I think every language sounds a little bit weird when it's robotic, but yeah, it's
For
getting
sure.
better. It's getting a lot better now.
I will say, adding to this conversation just briefly, because it made me think, not that this is super relevant to Cavalcade at all, but as far as like Americans craving culture and craving like this history, I've long said that's why I think so many people become like obsessed with Japanese culture, because they have such a rich like tapestry of like mythology and conceptualism there. I think we've talked about it on some of
Mhm.
our Ghibli episodes, but like I would just also relate it to that because I think that's very prominent in like why so many people get lost in Japanese cultures, because it has those roots that American culture does not have.
I mean, you're probably right. Like for me, because I'm a fan of I've always loved the specifically Japanese culture and history myself. And if coming from a country with its own rich history and long history, this probably wouldn't apply. But what applies is that this culture is so singularly different to everything else because of how they kept away from everyone for like 1,000 years. They're like a science experiment of like what happens when you just don't allow like entire population to meet anyone for a millennium. See what happens, you know. And that's kind of what makes it kind of like exotic that way, you know. Like the language is what it is, and like the customs, and the fact that these customs persist because the culture is extremely conservative, like makes it sort of alluring that way. So I agree. Yeah.
And with myth, it's always like also your personal taste. Like I really love Japanese myth, but I also love Indigenous Americans myth and how it's baked in nature, and like the nature element is something that I find a lot of power in. So like I am assume it's also like that. Where like
Yeah.
I don't really care peace and love about medieval stories, or like that doesn't do anything.
Oh,
for me.
I love them, by the way.
No, valid, and
Yeah.
not trying to like. I'm just saying personally, my flavor, not something that really does a lot for me. So I don't look at England and think like, oh my god, I love how it's all this like royal stuff. But you want to talk about like nature, then I'm much more into it. So
Right.
it's all a personal taste.
Like, listen to our episode on Excalibur where I try to explain to Randy why Excalibur is better than he thinks it is. There's just like this the Arthurian legends, or like this medieval sort of mythology of that's kind of sort of church adjacent, but not really. There's like paganism kind of baked into this because people's views are kind of like still kind of steeped in tradition that's kind of sort of not church related, but church is kind of coming in, like, you know, like Vatican's coming. It's not Vatican, just Rome is coming in with their own view of the world, and it's also based on Greek and Roman mythology. It's all kind of mixed together. It's just, I don't know, it's phenomenal to think of. It's very mystique, very, you know, dark and sticky. I kind of always like that. But anyway, Cavalcade.
Yeah, well, I guess wrapping up with Cavalcade. I think we've kind of exhausted this conversation. Is there anything left before we get into our Best Picture scorecard that we want to mention about Cavalcade before we move on?
I mean,
anything left we want to throw at this family?
I don't know if this is going to be part of the scorecard where like why this movie won Best Picture, and because I think that's an interesting piece of history of how this movie ended up winning, right, and why, right, and what was happening kind of like on the fringes in the Academy. That's kind of like an interesting sort of sub story. I'm not sure if this is something that you planned for later.
No, I would. No, now is a great time to get into it. Do you have a specific story? Because I don't necessarily have.
This is kind of like, okay, synthesizing everything that we've been talking about. There's also like in 1929 you have the Great Depression, but Hollywood's kind of like almost pretending it doesn't exist because they're awash in cash until like 1933. And this is something interesting to me because in 1933 the Academy was like a, I don't know, institution invented by Louis B. Mayer, who was also like Harvey Weinstein of his time apparently.
We talked about that last time, yes.
Yeah, he was like you hear stories, right? But he invented this essentially just to make sure that he could centralize control over Tinseltown, right? But the idea was that they agreed that the entire film industry in Hollywood will take a 50% pay cut, and they decided there were massive riots. Actors who were being paid like $50 a week would be taking a pay cut, but the problem was like the Warner Brothers, Louis B. Mayer, they didn't take a pay cut. They were all like,
shocked. No, I'm so surprised by that. Do tell.
And then like I think Jack Warner's son-in-law, David O. Selznick, they cut his paycheck in half. So because he was running production for the Warners, and he goes like, fuck you, and he left and he started 20th Century Fox, so like around in the early 30s as a result. But the big byproduct of that was massive backlash against the Academy, to the tune that people started leaving, and like the Writers Guild, which was kind of sort of alive but not really, like people were like, I don't know, meeting in a bar every now and again to just talk about writer shit. But they revived and they started poaching people as in like, join our guild, but in order to join the guild you have to leave the Academy. and the Directors Guild started, and SAG started all at the same time. And as a competition to the Academy, they wanted to put into the ground. And like by the end of like 1933, so before this movie got its award, because I think it was, the ceremony was like in 1934. The Academy had like $300 in the bank. Like they were so close to being ruined. And the one guy who didn't really get poached was Frank Capra. Frank Capra was like a big supporter of the Academy because he was like an immigrant. He was kind of like a success story, just like a massive scrapper, and he worked for Columbia. And Columbia was also a bit of a like an underdog. No one really took them seriously because they didn't have money. They were like, I think their studio was on Poverty Road. They did like B movies, like cheap comedies, shit like that. And this was a big year for them because Lady for a Day ended up scoring like 4 nominations, and that was their first time they were nominated for Best Picture. And apparently there was this sort of massive campaign behind it to say like, well, how about we push for this, you know? And to the tune that whenever Best Director Oscar was being announced, and the guy says, "Coming up, Frank," and Frank Capra stands up. And someone says, "Not you, Frank Lloyd." And he goes like, "Fuck." And he sits down in shame. But like, long story short, he would then next year he would sweep with It Happened One Night, right? And that would have been the big, massive Columbia sort of hit that essentially made Columbia into one of the big 5, right? Because you had like RKO, Warner's, MGM, and I want to say Universal, and UA, and and then there's this sort of element of that sort of almost like a fuck you to this sort of up and coming sort of mode of cheap and dirty filmmaking, these screwball sort of uplifting, combating depression movies, because we have to reward this just mammoth sort of movie that looks like Intolerance or Birth of a Nation. Because they were on like a drive to rehabilitate D.W. Griffith. So I found that interesting.
It is funny how with Cavalcade, and actually a lot of these early Best Picture winners, like, so we kind of have now this narrative about what the Academy rewards, and one of which I think, especially like maybe it ended kind of a decade ago, at least took a break, is like these really out of touch, like Oscar bait films, clearly meant for like kind of more privileged white audiences. This very much so is like the kickstart of that series. Like it very much fits that narrative in a similar way. Like I didn't realize how many of these early Best Picture winners were like kind of woke and kind of won of like political reasons, especially like Cimarron, for example. But no, this is very much so one of those where it's like, oh, this is one of those in a very derogatory way. Like that's a classic Academy win for Best Picture. Though you also have to kind of contend with like it was a big hit, to be fair. It wasn't just a political reason, but certainly fits that narrative. Yeah.
Like I find it like an interest. It's not a perfect symmetry, but I think for modern audiences to understand, I want to say how different this sort of thing is between like what was the like a dark horse in this race, which was Lady for a Day, and this. It's kind of like La La Land versus Moonlight, where you have this big studio picture that's self-congratulatory, as in like, look how we used to make big movies and epic shit, scope, editing, everything, right? Songs. And there's this sort of like small thing with like 6 people that actually eventually ends up defining cinema later on, because this becomes the mainstream. So we kind of almost have like, that's I want to see, maybe it's not necessarily that this was like a conspiracy to go and like, no, let's do this because we love D.W. Griffith. He wasn't that much of a racist, now was he? You know, it's not like that, I don't think. But I think there's a convergence point in here, as in like there's like almost like a changing of the baton, passing of the baton of like this mode of filmmaking is kind of coming to an end. So let's just give this. It's like a late appreciation award to the mode of filmmaking that's going out of style. While next year, this rom-com with Clark Gable is gonna absolutely make people lose their pants. You know. But you already have a precursor to this here, this sort of movie that speaks to the falsity of American dream, but it also gives you this screwball sort of incentive to keep watching, because it's like a movie of like layering chaos of, how about we solve our problem by making another problem for ourselves. So, oh, this woman's trying to, I don't know, hide the fact that she's poor, so let's hide this, pretend she's rich. Oh, someone's gonna find out, let's kidnap them. Oh, but the police now is on our tail, let's make a party. It's and that kind of filmmaking becomes the mainstream, but at the time when Cavalcade gets to win, it's not yet. It's kind of still like an undercurrent underneath this sort of big scope sandal epic sort of filmmaking, these movies that kind of span decades. It's about it's like a 19th century almost storytelling where, like, I don't know, you pick up Frankenstein, it's not going to take place over like a week. It's going to take place over like 5 decades, So it almost feels like this is a late passing of the baton, because the talkies just came online and people are figuring out what the talkies are going to be about and how we're going to change storytelling. And Capra's kind of at the forefront of this, but he doesn't get to win. But he's so sure he's going to get to win that he even stands up when they call a Frank. It's so phenomenal. I don't know. It's so good.
No, you took away that like a detail about the directing win. I think it's one of the funniest Oscar moments. Like, truly, imagine sitting down and being like, "Oops, sorry, not me." It's so good.
It's almost like the Moonlight La La Land switch. It's like,
I'm trying to remember. It was years ago when Michael Keaton was nominated for Birdman. It kind of became, totally different media environment, but it became viral that clips of him were zoomed in on, that he had his acceptance speech out and he slipped it back in his pocket while the other actor won. Can't even remember who won. But it's just something that surfaced in my memory where I thought, yeah, it's happened before, but it's smaller. It wasn't as humiliating as what happened with Capra. That must have been really embarrassing.
Yeah.
Well, it's not. She didn't do anything embarrassing, but I always like watch when, oh my god, what's her name? I'm blinking on it. Olivia Colman won for The Favorite, and Glenn Close like thought finally I'm going to win, and you can just see in her face like it drops when it's like, and then she has to act like she's really excited, but you can tell like she was dying. So prepared, like finally this is my moment, and then it was ripped away. Granted, for a great winner, and genuinely I think my favorite Oscar speech of all time, but always heartbreak a little bit for Glenn Close there.
Yeah, she's been nominated like 8 or 9 times and hasn't won. So I can understand. It's not necessarily her ego. It's very much, why do you keep doing this to me?
And we've also had
nominating me.
With Oscars, this narrative around like it's become more and more, I feel like, predictable over the years. So like when there's an upset like that, I think it hits even harder because you can feel kind of reassured that I'm going to win. It's not as bad as Diane Warren as far as wins and losses. That poor woman. I mean, they keep throwing her up there, and she like every year grows less and less seemingly interested in being at the awards show. But tragic.
I mean, especially when in the best actress races, that there's always been these sort of like Joan Fontaine and Olivia de Havilland, for instance, they had a massive feud, and there would be like a third person coming in from behind, and they were like, "What? Who's this?" Or like was it 1950 where you had All About Eve, Sunset Boulevard, and there's like a third person winning. It's just bananas, right?
I talked about that last week with some friends of mine. We were watching The Substance, and 3 of them hadn't seen it. I had, and we talked about how Demi Moore lost to Mikey Madison, which we thought is so interesting because it plays into the themes of The Substance, which is about older actress, really, really putting everything into a role, and then losing to a younger actress. And I brought that up as an example. I said, listen, in 1950, there were 2 films that came out about aging actresses having to put up with a lot of shit, Sunset Boulevard and All About Eve, and they lost to Judy Holliday in Born Yesterday. This has happened before. Yeah, and there's nothing against Judy Holliday or Born Yesterday. No. I'm sure that it's wonderful, or that there's reasons that she won. But in retrospect, I think, not even retrospect, but I think immediately at the time, just like with The Substance, where we thought that is almost another meta moment having to do with the film that she lost for, which is about, older women not getting their dues or getting recognized for their work.
Yeah.
All I will say is that give us a couple months, and I believe in June, I want to say, we will be discussing that in detail, I assure you.
Yes, I
So
think I
many
signed
cool
up for that. I
stories,
want to
yeah.
be there for that one.
We're on the runway there. With that, I think let's go ahead and let's close out Cavalcade with our ClapperCast Best Picture scorecard. If you're at home, FYI, completely for fun. Do not take this too seriously. We do not need to hear about how bad our takes are. We're going to take an average between us, but we have 5 categories. We are going to rank or give a score, I guess, rather individually, 1 through 5 for each category. We'll take our average and we'll see where this stacks up. So let's start out with our first category, which is inventiveness. How does this film push forward cinema, whether it's technical or narrative? Is this a film with great inventiveness? Jakub, I'll turn it over to you first. What score did you have for inventiveness?
I gave it a 4, predominantly on the technical merit. Narratively, almost like brought cinema back a decade.
I agree.
So I'm gonna peg it at 4. 4 for inventiveness.
Hillary?
I put it at a 2. I didn't get very much out of this that I hadn't seen in films that came before it that much. I did give it a 2 for 2 reasons, as far as the fact that it was able to kind of angle its way around the Hays Code with the use of profanity, even though that wasn't intentional, and then setting a template that we talked about, which is the upstairs downstairs phenomenon, and then of course in the 21st century the wild popularity of Downton Abbey, which is upper classes, lower classes struggling together in a kind of idealized representation of historical events. So 2.
And I am right there between you guys at a 3. I think this does have some technical things that are worthy. As an adaptation of a play, it's pretty interesting how they filmed the play, and I think it kind of pushed that forward. But yeah, I didn't necessarily think this was like truly shocking in the sense of like, I think this is reinventing cinema, but I think it had elements for sure.
I did say it. I have to say that, like big crowd scenes in 1933. This is something like putting people like outside of a ship, and there's like 300 extras. That counts for something because there's no CGI to like invent a lot of people, right? And these dissolves, like these sort of frequent montages. The biggest one being, I think, between sort of 1916. That's actually kind of a lot of work, and it's all just practical, physical, compositing of these images. That's that's probably like this should did it get an editing Oscar?
I don't know if that existed at the time.
It should have.
I don't believe so. I've ripped up my paper at this point that had all those details.
Oh no.
So we'll go to the research department. I think a 3 is fine. I mean, that puts us at a 3 total because it's 9 total divided by 3. So
Sure.
I think that's pretty fair. Next up, we have viewing quality. How is this film to actually watch? I think a Best Picture winner should be watchable.
Oh.
I put it at a solid 2. It's pretty boring. It does have these campy elements. Again, like it is hard to give a 1 to like a film that has one of my favorite scenes in the history of cinema, which is the Titanic reveal. Truly, like I would rewatch this with any of my friends for the first time just for that scene and turn to them and like watch their reaction because I think it's so funny. But
For those
certainly, I think
please
this
tell
is
us what
pretty
the
boring.
reveal is. Just describe in your mind's eye what the reveal is, because we've been dancing around this, and this is epic. You need to tell us. You need to tell
It's
everyone.
funny. It's good. So I'm at a 2. Hillary, where are you on this?
I'm at the same number. I also chose a 2. There's nothing very visually innovative about this. It's very stagey, of course, because it's based on a play. There's only so much you can do and stay true to Coward's dialogue, or at least that's what they chose to do with this one. And then, of course, the montages I found to be very kind of repetitive and dissonant, and very like. I know that they're trying to encapsulate the chaos of war and things like that, but when it happens for that long and you're just seeing, I felt like I was starting to see some of the same shots over and over again, which is on purpose. There's intention behind that. It was kind of like, yeah, I know. And also in the context of World War One, we already had a Best Picture winner for World War One. There's at least 2 other films that are up for nomination this year that also address World War One, probably in more interesting ways. So as far as that sequence for me in particular, which I think may have been a standout for a lot of people, for me it was just it didn't do much for me, and just about everything else was very yeah, I guess like maybe in the same template of upstairs, downstairs, or Downton Abbey, people talking in rooms, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not very innovative.
It's
I
what they
guess this
talk
is
about the
like,
problem, right?
yeah. I guess what I would recommend at home, like, I don't think the viewing quality ever is that effective for what it's actually going for. But even with what you said, Hillary, with like the constant montages, I think if you had the right group of friends and you had like turned this into a drinking game, I
Oh,
think that's
absolutely.
where it like thrives. Like drink at every model or every montage, drink at every like historical event reveal. Like I think there's a way that if you take this and you just like turn it on its head and poke fun at it, that's where I get the viewing quality from.
Yeah.
To be clear, it's not in that. Actually, I think the film is
No,
that good at
I
what it's doing.
immediately got what you were going for. So like it's like
Yes.
as far as like that visual reveal that you're talking about. But that's not the intention. And I brought up the fainting scene earlier when we were
Yes.
talking. That was supposed to
every
be a
time
moment where I
someone
bet the
says, "Oh,
audience in 1930 was like, "Oh, this is so terrible," and now a lot of people would laugh at it. So that just shows how the passage of time changes things.
Yaka, where are you on viewing
Oh,
quality?
before I do this, I have to say that sort of the big reveal of these people just taking this massive. Oh, what are we gonna do in the future? Future is so bright. And they leave, and there's this live buoy saying RMS Titanic. So stupid.
Well, even it's just, and did we just? I felt like we just watched that scene where they're on the beach and they don't move. The camera doesn't move. There's just so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just
But-
stated sad.
Drink every time a man suppresses his emotions. Drink
Oh,
every
you'd
time
be
a woman
dead. At
faints.
the end of the film. You'd be so fucking dead. Oh boy, I'm trying to think if there was a word they repeated, or whenever an accent is just so ridiculous and clipped that it just doesn't apply to our time anymore. That would also kill you.
Whenever Una O'Connor blows out the mic, you could definitely include that. Like, there's a lot of options here, I would say.
Oh, does
Yeah.
it drink anytime someone says the word snifter?
Did they say snifter a lot?
Yeah.
Did I black that out?
Well, you can't handle. Yeah, well, you can't handle it because you're always buzzed after a few snifters.
Yeah. Something that will kill people? This is totally, I mean, we were just mentioning Titanic. I once dared people take a drink every time Jack and Rose say each other's names. You'll be unconscious.
God.
Yeah.
By the end of
So
that
viewing
movie.
experience, is it my turn?
Yes.
Right. I'm a solid 1.5. I want to say
Okay.
because
I want to hear everything you have to say about this.
Look, I appreciate the technical merit of all these, but I totally agree. It gets repetitive real fucking quick. So, yeah, 2 hours. Oh my god. I'm so happy that this because this could have been a 4-hour silent epic, really, and I'm glad it wasn't.
God. Yeah, don't even say that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's brutal, but I agree with you. I'm going to round that. Technically, we're at a 1.83, but we're going to round it up just to a 2. So for viewing quality, we're at 2. Next up, representation of year. How well does this film represent the year it was released in? Is this good representation for the year? Hillary, you can start us off. Where are you for representation?
I think there's just way better films that came out that year. I haven't seen all of the Best Picture nominees for this year. At first I said I hadn't seen any, and that's not true. I did see She Done Him Wrong, which, if you think about the Hays Code approaching all that sort of stuff, to me was so surprising that a Mae West film that's very full of double entendres and implied sluttiness that got nominated. I have a big smile on my face saying that. I just find that really funny. But I mean, even things like 42nd Street, and then I mentioned other World War II adjacent films, A Farewell to Arms, or even I'm a Fugitive from a Chain Gang with Paul Mooney. I'm sure that those had a lot of merit. I mean, Little Women and even Lady for a Day, which I have not seen, but I did hear a radio adaptation with the same cast. I knew the gist of the story. And then I know you saw earlier this week, Carson, you saw The Private Life of Henry VIII. So you got to see Charles Lawton just tearing it up. Just a great performer all around, very underrated. But even things that weren't nominated, like I wrote down some of them, like King Kong wasn't nominated.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I found that weird. And then there's other just more transgressive films out there like Rain or Trouble in Paradise. The Story of Temple Drake, Designed for Living, also written by Noel Coward, which is about a throuple. Queen Christina, Footlight Parade, Gold Diggers of 1933 should have been nominated for something. Dinner at 8. there's so many other films. Oh yeah, I wanted to mention One Way Passage. I just really like that film, and it did win Best Writing. There's a lot of things going on this year that I find more engaging or interesting. Maybe they weren't as engaging and interesting at the time. It's just all a matter of like where you exist in history. But it is very confounding to me as far as representation of the year. It seems to be just the most saltine cracker and milk choice for Best Picture. So I gave it a 1.
Fair enough. Jakub, where are you at?
I think I'm kind of sort of with Hillary on this. I feel like even big epics or big blockbusters, something like King Kong, are kind of sort of just elsewhere. This movie is like a vestige of times gone by, so it's almost like a reminder of like, hey, weren't movies kind of like that? It's almost like trying to just gauge what the year was like by watching The Artist.
Oh boy.
You know, it's
Yeah.
you know, like I don't know, this like you see, there's like screwballs are coming up, and I did see Lady Faraday today, and that's way better than this.
Yeah.
I have seen Farewell to Arms years and years ago. It's again different movie, different sort of mentality. This is a movie that sort of like everyone goes like, if Daniel Griffiths is still alive, can we please ask him back? Because we no longer hate him, thanks. You know, and I feel like this is just out of step. So I'm at a 1 for this.
Fair enough. I'm actually going to be the Cavalcade stan in this category. I think it is clear for me watching some of the other films, while yes, there's a lot of better options, I would say nearly any other choice you could pick is better than Cavalcade. I think this does speak to some truth at the time, whether it's a truth I appreciate or I relate to or I see in 2026. It was a big hit. I think that there were a lot of families who felt like they could get a power from this and see themselves in it. I didn't go super high. I went with a 3.
Oh wow!
But I do think it's a little bit better than you guys are giving it credit for in this category. Doesn't really help. It's going to get a 1.5 from us total, but interesting enough, I guess. Next up, category 4, we have legacy. How is this film aged? Does it still have a strong legacy, or what is the legacy of the film? I went a pretty easy 1 on this. I mean, this is the butt of a joke, right? Even compared
Hitler's
to other
favorite
films.
movie.
Hitler's favorite film.
And it's not even his favorite movie, apparently. So it's like the legend isn't even true.
Letterboxd hates it. We have stats on that. Even though I would say there's a lot of worse Best Picture winners, including like Broadway Melody, which is right there. I feel like you hear the most about how bad and how torturous Cavalcade is. I would say this has a disastrous legacy. Undeniably has some fans throughout history, especially at the time. But yeah, with legacy, I can't go higher than a 1. Jakub, are you going to be? Where's the legacy for you? Yeah.
1. Okay. Can I go 0? No, I can't go 0. I'm going to give it a 1. I'm not going to be an asshole.
I think you could go 0 if it was a lost film. I think that has to be a 0 because there's no legacy then. But yeah, for this, valid. Hillary?
I also went with a 1. My note next to it is what legacy other than, all the derisive stuff we brought up. And then I put next to it, it's like Hitler, not even true.
Okay, well, if this is going to catch where we put wings, we have to have a really strong last category here. Final category, how deserving overall is this of Best Picture? Considering everything we've talked about, all the different categories, all the ways we've looked at this film, how deserving is Cavalcade of taking home Best Picture? Jakub, go ahead and start us off.
I haven't seen all the nominees, but even by today's viewing of Lady Faraday, I would have given that the award over this. And I'm pretty sure Farewell to Arms would have been a better choice because I think just Hemingway had a knack for getting sort of the truth, the verite of what war was like kind of better on the page than this shit was. So yeah, it feels like a miss. It feels like a self-congratulatory sort of like a career best achievement award almost for a type of filmmaking that's on its way out, which is it's not even for like a director like, we missed out on Frank Lloyd for 7 years. No, it's the 6th one, by the way, like for 6 years. It's his time now. It's his time. It's not for the movie that he deserved, but it like that was also a tradition. Like Bette Davis would not get one. No one would get an Oscar for the shit that they deserved an Oscar because someone would realize, we really missed the boat on that one. let's give her one next year regardless, you know. And then it just perpetuates because the better movie goes like, oh, they missed out on that one because we had to give the sort of the award for the one from the year before, and it just goes along. So yeah, not very deserving, sorry. So I want to say a 1.5.
Okay. Hillary, how are you on deserving of Best Picture?
I also put a 1. It's very much in step with the representation of the year, with all of these films that I just mentioned that came out the same year that are more transgressive, more innovative, more memorable, just more in every sense of the word. And they're talked about more almost 100 years later. I don't think that this makes much sense, so I'm putting it at a 1.
Fair enough. I went with a 2. Even though I think this is probably the worst film in this lineup, which I think is like overall a pretty weak Best Picture lineup from what I've seen at least. I don't know. It's kind of funny. There is at least stuff we can talk about with this. I'm happy it's not like State Fair where it's literally just like, don't y'all love the county fair? I think there's a little bit more here, but I can't go higher than a 2, which brings us to a 1.5 total for the category. So total, that is going to bring us to, that brings us to a 9 total. So 9 out of 25.
Wings got one like 20 something, right?
Yeah, 22 out of 25.
Oh,
so
shit.
Unfortunately, Cavalcade, we kind of have our high and now we have our low.
Womp, womp.
We will see, if this ends up being the lowest, but certainly it didn't quite meet us where Wings were, but I think that's fair.
I'm looking forward to The Greatest Show on Earth, and I don't really want to be on that episode because I would have to watch this movie again.
You have to. The 45-minute sequence of just a circus?
Yeah. Jimmy Stewart wearing a clown costume, unironically, though. That's
I rewatched The Fabelmans recently, and I forgot that's the movie that inspired Spielberg.
Spielberg's favorite
filmmaker. Yeah.
What?
The opposite of this being Hitler's favorite movie. That's Spielberg's favorite movie. So we'll
so whether you like them or hate them, you can still really question their taste.
Oh yeah. Like this is kind of how I've always seen this. Like critics or film, like I say this a lot. It's like never trust the filmmaker to tell you what their movie's about, because when you hear what movies they consider great, you just lose all respect to them. So it's just like, no, this is Spielberg goes like The Greatest Show on Earth. What a movie!
What a film!
His mom was calling him like Cecil B. Spielberg or something like that. This was I know.
We'll get there. Can't wait. I mean, obviously, we're going to do an episode on The Greatest Show on Earth. Let's be clear. We will get there.
Nice.
With that, that's going to do it for today's episode. Thank you both for joining me. If you want to keep on the Best Picture Rewind series that we are doing, next episode, next month, we're jumping a few years. Again, we don't have time to review everything, but we're going to be talking about The Great Ziegfeld. So we will get there next month. With that said, Jakub, where can we find you and your work online?
Right, so my work. So first of all, the podcast, Uncut Gems podcast, is the podcast I run with Randy. So and Carson occasionally shows up. Hillary shows up a little bit more often than Carson, and a bunch of friends as well. So at Uncut Gems Pod is where we are on social media, uncutgemspodcast.com, or just go on Spotify or on Apple Music or wherever the hell you listen to podcasts and just search for Uncut Gems Podcast. You will find us. So that's what we do. Also have a Patreon account where we have extra shows. So there's 500 plus recordings I think that we have already between the Patreon and the main show. This is just mammoth work. So that's where you can hear my beautiful voice. And also I write some things sometimes. I mean, almost daily now at this point because I'm unemployed. So what else am I supposed to be doing? I know, look for a job, idiot. But you can find my written work, flashonfilm.com, FLASZ onfilm.com is where I write essays, reviews, commentary. I don't report the news. I just try to make sense of it in real time. So it's more like a stream of consciousness film criticism. So you can find this work there. And at Flash on Film is where you can kind of follow my work if you're doing this through social media. So you can do that in many ways. But yeah, that's where I am.
Cannot recommend Uncut Gems enough. If you like when we get I think Uncut Gems does a great job, not to sell it too hard, but I always have to say this. Like if you like really in-depth film, like history analysis mixed with just like a really fun vibe, I think there's no podcast better than Uncut Gems. Would highly recommend. We recently did an episode on Ridley Scott's Legend, which is a film I was not prepared for. I was on that episode, and it was genuinely some of the most fun I've had on a podcast in quite a while. Just an absurd film, but really, link in the description. Go check that out. Again, Hillary's on there, Jack's on there, Nicolo's on there, great Randy Burrows is on there, and obviously Jakub's on there. So highly, highly, highly recommend that podcast for everyone if you're a fan of ClapperCast and for some reason have not checked out Uncut Gems. Do it. Hillary, where can we find your work online?
The easiest way to find me, as I say every single time, is probably through Letterboxd. You can find me under the name Degelle, Degelle. And if you go there, there's a campsite.bio link you could click on that will take you to everything that I do on the internet, including my blog. Last month, or actually, no, it was just this month. It wasn't long ago. I put up an alternate cut of Wings that took out all the Clara Bow scenes and it became an entirely different film. So if you want to check that out, it will just link to YouTube. You can watch that for free. And next month, I'm writing a piece that somewhat relates to the Uncut Gems episode I did about the birdcage. That's part of Uncut Gems Patreon, in which I'm going to try to mount as strong as a defense I can, defending sissies on film, which is effeminate gay men, because I will definitely go to bat for them, and I think that they should be represented. Period. Yes.
That is the one fault of Uncut Gems, is sometimes they do lack a queer perspective. So they'll talk about Steven Soderbergh's, like, Let Them All Talk, and be like, this is so boring. It's just a bunch of rich people on a boat. And it's like, no, you don't understand. This is like, they're queening out right now. Like, this is iconic.
The one episode that Carson was supposed
I've never been more mad.
It's like, why wasn't I there?
Never been more mad. I was on a walk listening to it and ranting, like, oh my God, they just don't get it. Like, Meryl Streep's on a boat. You don't get it.
Oh my God.
And Hillary, please check out on Letterboxd. I would genuinely say the best Letterboxd follow you could make today.
Oh, that's very sweet, Carson. Thank
fantastic. So with that, you can find the podcast on Twitter at ClapperPodcast. New episodes on our Patreon every single month and new episodes every couple of weeks. Next week, myself and Nicolo Grasso, we are diving into the world of Godard for the first time on the podcast. So that's going to be an interesting conversation. But whether you want old films, new films, continuing this Best Picture Rewind series, plenty for you to enjoy here on ClapperCast. So with that, thank you so much for listening and watching and supporting us. Goodbye.